The stars looked cold and distant through the viewport of the UES Liberty. Commander Jake Harrison stood there for the third time that day, watching the empty space ahead of them. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he kept holding the cup, anyway. It was something normal to hold on to when everything else felt like it was falling apart. "Commander, we're getting more signals from the outer colonies," Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez called from the communication station. Her voice was tired. Everyone on the ship was tired. They had been running for 3 months now, picking up humans from every corner of the galaxy. Jake walked over to her station. The screen showed dozens of red dots scattered across a star map. Each dot was a human settlement, a research station, or a small colony that was calling for help. "How many today?" 15 new distress calls. The mining station on Kepler 438b says coalition ships are already in their system. They have maybe 6 hours before the deadline. Amy looked up at him with worried eyes. "Sir, we can't save them all." Jake knew she was right, but he couldn't say it out loud. Every human they left behind would either die or disappear into coalition prison camps. The aliens had made their choice clear. Humanity was too dangerous to stay in the galaxy, too violent, too unpredictable. They had 6 months to get out, and that time was almost up. Captain Lisa Torres entered the bridge, her uniform wrinkled from working 20-hour days. "Jake, we need to talk." She nodded toward his private office. Lisa had been his friend for 15 years, since they were both young officers dreaming of exploring the stars. Now those dreams felt like a joke. They walked into his office and Lisa closed the door. "We have a problem. The refugee fleet is too big. We're carrying almost 2 million people across 47 ships. The food processors are breaking down. The life support systems are overloaded and people are starting to panic." Jake sat down at his desk and rubbed his eyes. 2 million people. That was everyone they could save from the human colonies. There had been more, maybe 3 million humans scattered across the galaxy, but the coalition had moved faster than expected. "What do you suggest?" "We need to reach Earth soon. Really soon. Some of the smaller ships won't make it another month." Lisa sat across from him. "The children are getting sick first. Not enough fresh air, not enough space to run around. Dr. Collins says we're looking at a real crisis if we don't get them to a planet." Dr. Peter Collins was their chief science officer and the smartest person Jake had ever met. If he said there was a crisis coming, then there was definitely a crisis coming. "How long until we reach the Sol system?" 2 weeks if we push the engines hard. 3 weeks if we want to be safe." Lisa leaned forward. "Jake, what are we going to do when we get there? Earth hasn't had this many people on it for over a century. Most of the big cities were abandoned when everyone moved to the colonies. Where are we going to put 2 million refugees?" That was the question that kept Jake awake at night. Earth was beautiful, but it was small. The humans who still lived there had spent decades fixing the environment, cleaning the oceans and bringing back the forests. Now they were going to arrive with a massive fleet full of scared, tired people who needed food, shelter, and hope. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Amy Rodriguez stepped inside. "Sir, we're getting a transmission from Admiral Kethaval's fleet. The coalition is demanding we surrender our weapons and submit to inspection." Jake felt his jaw tighten. Admiral Kethaval was a Zephyrian, one of the cold, logical aliens who had voted to throw humanity out of the galaxy. He commanded the enforcement fleet that was making sure humans didn't try to hide anywhere. "Tell the Admiral that we're complying with the exile order. We're leaving galactic space and we won't be back." "Sir, he's demanding more than that. He wants us to surrender our military vessels and our advanced technology. He says humans can't be trusted with weapons, even in exile." Lisa stood up quickly. "Like hell we will. Those weapons are the only thing keeping the refugee fleet safe. There are pirates out here and worse things." Jake held up his hand to calm her down. He understood her anger, but getting mad wouldn't help anyone. "Amy, send a reply. Tell the Admiral that we're peaceful refugees seeking sanctuary in our home system. We have no intention of threatening anyone, but we won't surrender our ability to protect innocent people." Amy nodded and left to send the message. Lisa paced around the small office like a caged animal. "Jake, they're not going to let this go. The Coalition spent 2 years deciding that humans are too dangerous to exist in civilized space. They're not going to just wave goodbye and wish us luck. I know. Jake stood up and walked back to the viewport. Outside, he could see some of the other ships in their fleet. The cargo hauler New Boston was carrying 30,000 refugees from the agricultural worlds. The converted passenger liner Golden Gate had rescued everyone from the research stations in the Outer Rim. Each ship had its own story of loss and escape. Dr. Collins appeared on the bridge carrying a data pad and looking worried. He was a thin man with gray hair who had spent most of his life studying alien cultures. Now those cultures had rejected his entire species. "Commander, I've been analyzing the Coalition's official statement about our exile. And? They're afraid of us. Really afraid. The vote wasn't even close. Every single member species agreed that humans should be removed from galactic society. Even the species that we helped, that we saved from disasters or diseases, voted against us." Collins sat down heavily. "In 300 years of galactic history, no species has ever been exiled. We're the first." Jake thought about that. Humanity had joined the Galactic Coalition 50 years ago with such hope. They had shared their music, their literature, their scientific discoveries. Human doctors had cured alien diseases. Human engineers had built impossible structures on a dozen worlds. Human artists had created beauty that moved species who had never seen anything like it, but they had also brought their history. Wars that had lasted centuries. Weapons that could crack planets. A stubborn refusal to give up their independence, even when the aliens suggested it would be better for everyone. The Coalition had asked humanity to join their collective decision-making process, to let alien computers help guide human choices, to accept that individual freedom was less important than galactic harmony. Humans had said no, politely but firmly. They would cooperate, they would share, they would help build a better galaxy, but they would not surrender their right to choose their own path. That choice had led them here. 2 million refugees fleeing toward a small blue planet that most of them had never seen. "Amy, get me a channel to the entire fleet." Jake walked back to the center of the bridge. He needed to talk to his people, all of them. They deserved to know what they were flying toward. "Channel open, sir." Jake looked out at the stars one more time, then spoke. "This is Commander Harrison to all ships and all personnel. In 2 weeks we'll reach Earth. I know many of you have never been there. I know some of you are scared about what we'll find. But I want you to remember something. We're not just refugees running from something. We're pioneers returning home with everything we've learned among the stars." He paused, thinking about how to explain what he felt in his heart. The aliens think we're too dangerous for their perfect galaxy. Maybe they're right. Maybe humans are too stubborn, too independent, too willing to fight for what we believe in. But those same qualities are what got us to the stars in the first place. They're what saved every person on these ships. And they're what will help us build something new on the world where humanity began. The stars didn't look so cold anymore. Earth looked different from space than Jake remembered. The blue marble that humans had called home for millions of years was still beautiful, but now it had silver rings around it. Space stations and construction platforms orbited the planet, like metallic jewelry. Someone had been busy while humanity was scattered across the galaxy. "My God," whispered Captain Lisa Torres as she stood next to Jake on the bridge of the Liberty. "How many people are down there?" "About 800 million, Dr. Collins answered, reading from his scanner. "The population has been stable for decades. They've been focused on healing the planet instead of expanding." Jake nodded slowly. When humans first reached the stars, many people had left Earth behind. The planet had been crowded, polluted, and tired. But the people who stayed had worked hard to fix it. Now the oceans were clean, the forests were thick and green, and the cities hummed with clean energy. It was the Earth that humanity had always dreamed of having. The problem was that it wasn't ready for 2 million refugees. "Commander, we're getting a transmission from Earth Control," Amy Rodriguez announced from her station. "Chief Administrator Helen Wright wants to speak with you directly. Put her through." The main screen flickered and showed a woman in her 50s with short, gray hair and tired eyes. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Commander Harrison, this is Helen Wright. Welcome home. Thank you, Administrator. We have 47 ships carrying nearly 2 million people. We need emergency landing permissions and temporary shelter facilities. Helen's expression didn't change, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. Commander, we've been preparing for your arrival for 3 months. Every major city has construction crews working around the clock to build temporary housing. We've cleared landing zones in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. But I need to be honest with you. This is going to be difficult. How difficult? We're talking about doubling Earth's population overnight. Our food production can handle it, barely. Water and power won't be a problem thanks to the fusion plants you're bringing back from the colonies. But housing, medical care, job placement, psychological support for people who've never lived on a planet. Helen shook her head. We're going to need time. Jake understood. The people on his ships had lived their entire lives in space stations or on alien worlds. Many of them had never breathed natural air or felt real sunlight on their faces. Coming to Earth would be like learning to live all over again. We'll make it work, Jake said. We have to. I know you will. The first landing zone is ready in the former state of Kansas. It's mostly grassland now, perfect for temporary cities. We'll start bringing people down as soon as your ships are in stable orbit. Over the next few days, the massive operation began. Cargo haulers descended through Earth's atmosphere, carrying prefabricated buildings, fusion generators, and hydroponic farms. Engineer Carlos Martinez worked 18-hour days setting up power grids and water systems for tent cities that stretched for miles across the prairie. Carlos had been born on a mining station in the Alpha Centauri system. He had never seen grass before, never felt wind that wasn't made by air recyclers. The first morning he woke up in the temporary base camp, he spent an hour just walking around touching plants and breathing the strange, complicated smell of a living world. It's like the air has flavor, he told his crew chief Nina Brooks as they assembled another housing unit. On the station, air was just air. Here, every breath is different. Nina laughed. She had grown up on an agricultural world where humans had spent decades learning to grow earth crops in alien soil. Wait until you smell the ocean, or a forest after it rains. This planet is full of surprises. But not everyone was adjusting well. Dr. Rachel Stone had set up medical stations in each refugee camp, and she was seeing problems that worried her. People who had lived their whole lives seeing the same artificial lights and breathing recycled air were struggling with Earth's natural day and night cycle. The sun seemed too bright. The sky seemed too big. Some refugees refused to leave their temporary shelters. I'm calling it cosmic displacement syndrome, Rachel explained to Helen, right during their weekly meeting. These people have spent decades adapting to artificial environments. Earth feels alien to them now. Helen frowned as she looked at the medical reports. How many people are we talking about? Maybe 10% of the refugees are showing serious symptoms. Another 30% are having mild adjustment problems. The children are adapting faster than the adults, but even they're struggling with things like variable weather and natural sounds. In the camp outside Denver, former asteroid miner Tom Bradley sat outside his temporary shelter, staring at the mountains. He had spent 20 years in space working in the cold and quiet between the stars. The constant noise of wind and birds and insects made it hard for him to sleep. The way the light changed throughout the day confused him. On his mining station, every day had been exactly the same. You'll get used to it, promised his neighbor, Janet Miller. She had been a research scientist on a space station near the Galactic core. I've been here 2 weeks now, and yesterday I actually enjoyed watching the sunset. How do people live with all this chaos? Tom asked. Everything keeps changing. The temperature, the light, the sounds. How do you plan anything when you never know what the weather will do? Janet smiled. I think that's the point. Earth people learn to live with uncertainty. Maybe that's something we need to learn too. The integration wasn't just difficult for the refugees. Earth's original population was struggling too. Senator Kevin O'Brien held rallies in major cities, complaining that the planet's resources were being stretched too thin. We spent a century healing this world, he told crowds in New York and Los Angeles. Now we're supposed to tear it up again to build refugee camps? These people chose to leave Earth. Why is it our responsibility to take care of them now? But other Earth residents felt differently. Admiral Susan Blake had been born on Earth and spent her career in the Planetary Defense Force. She worked closely with the colonial military units that had arrived with the refugee fleet, and she was impressed by what she saw. These aren't just refugees, she explained to the Earth Defense Council. These are experienced space travelers, combat veterans, scientists who've worked with alien technology, engineers who've built cities on airless worlds. They're not asking for charity. They're offering to help build something better. She was right. As the weeks passed, the temporary camps began to change. Colonial engineers started building structures that were more advanced than anything Earth had seen. Fusion plants that had powered entire star systems now provided clean energy to whole regions. Agricultural specialists like Nina Brooks introduced farming techniques that could grow more food using less land and water. The most interesting changes happened when different groups started working together. Marine biologist Elena Vasquez had arrived on one of the last refugee ships carrying a small tank containing something amazing. Inside the tank were coral singers, alien organisms from a water world near the galactic edge. They were intelligent musical creatures that could communicate through sound patterns in water. Elena set up a research station in a flooded quarry in Michigan, where she began studying how the coral singers reacted to Earth's dolphins. The results surprised everyone. The dolphins seemed to understand the alien songs, and the coral singers responded to dolphin calls. Within weeks, Elena was documenting the first truly successful interspecies communication between Earth and alien life forms. "It's incredible," she told Jake during one of his visits to the camps. "The coral singers are teaching the dolphins mathematical concepts through music. The dolphins are showing the coral singers how to navigate Earth's ocean currents. They're learning from each other." Similar collaborations were happening everywhere. Colonial soldiers taught Earth's peacekeepers advanced tactics they had learned, fighting alien threats. Earth's environmental scientists shared restoration techniques with refugees who wanted to heal damaged worlds. Artists from dozens of different colonies began creating new forms of music, painting, and sculpture that mixed human creativity with alien influences. General Rick Thompson watched these developments with interest. He had been put in charge of integrating the colonial military units with Earth's defense forces, and he was starting to see something remarkable. The same qualities that had made humans too aggressive for the Galactic Coalition were now helping them adapt to their new situation. "We're not just surviving," he told Admiral Blake during their morning briefing. "We're evolving. These people aren't trying to recreate what they lost out there. They're building something new." But not everything was going smoothly. Long-range sensors were picking up strange signals from the direction of the galactic core. Communication with the few remaining human colonies in distant systems had gone completely silent, and sometimes late at night refugees would wake up screaming from dreams of darkness and voices calling from empty space. Earth was becoming something new, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the stars. 2 years after the Great Homecoming, Earth looked like a completely different world. Jake Harrison stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, one of 12 orbital habitats that now surrounded the planet like a necklace of light. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the blue marble below, but it wasn't the same Earth he remembered from his childhood. Floating cities drifted across the Pacific Ocean, their solar collectors gleaming in the sunlight. Underground complexes stretched beneath the Sahara Desert, their domed gardens visible through crystal skylights. The Amazon rainforest had doubled in size, fed by atmospheric processors that cleaned the air while they worked. Earth had become something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Dr. Laura Kim said as she joined Jake at the window. She was Earth's new director of astrophysics, a former colonial researcher who had spent 15 years studying neutron stars and distant systems. Now she spent her days watching Earth transform itself. "Beautiful and impossible," Jake replied. 2 years ago, everyone said it couldn't work. 800 million people and 2 million refugees on one planet. Now look at it. Laura nodded, but her expression was troubled. "Jake, we need to talk. I've been analyzing the long-range sensor data, and there's something you need to see. They walked through the station's corridors, past laboratories where Earth scientists worked alongside researchers from a dozen former human colonies. The fusion of different knowledge and techniques was creating breakthroughs that neither group could have achieved alone. Climate engineers who had learned to terraform barren worlds were now perfecting Earth's weather control systems. Biologists who had studied alien ecosystems were helping Earth's forests grow faster and stronger than ever before. Laura's laboratory was located in the station's science section, a maze of equipment and displays that monitored everything happening in the Sol system and beyond. She led Jake to a large screen showing a map of the galaxy, with thousands of colored dots marking different star systems. "This is what the galaxy looked like when you left for Earth," Laura said, touching a control. The map showed a network of bright lines connecting the dots, representing communication channels and trade routes between different worlds. "And this is what it looks like now." The map changed, and Jake felt his stomach drop. Most of the bright lines had disappeared. Whole sectors of the galaxy were dark, their communication networks silent. The carefully organized structure of galactic civilization was falling apart. "What happened?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "We're not sure. The few signals we're still receiving talk about something called the silence. It's not an invasion or a war, it's something else. Entire star systems are just going quiet one by one. The Zephyrian Empire has lost contact with half of its colonies. The Etherian Collective hasn't sent a message to anyone in 6 months." Laura brought up another display, showing signal analysis from the past year. "The pattern is moving inward, from the galactic edge heading toward the core worlds. It's systematic, methodical. Whatever this is, it's not random." Jake studied the data, his mind working through the implications. "Have you shared this with Admiral Blake and the Defense Council?" "I briefed them yesterday. They're taking it seriously, but there's not much we can do. Earth's long-range communication arrays can barely reach the nearest coalition worlds. We're too far out on the galactic rim to get detailed information about what's happening." But Jake was thinking about something else. "Laura, show me the pattern, again. How long between the first disappearances and when they reached the inner systems?" Laura manipulated the display, showing the progression of the dark zones over time. "About 18 months from the outer rim to the mid-level colonies. If the pattern continues, it should reach the coalition core worlds within another year. And after that? After that, it depends on how fast this thing moves through inhabited space. Earth is about as far from the galactic center as you can get and still be in the galaxy. We might have 2 years, maybe 3, before whatever this is reaches us." Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at the map. Finally, he asked the question that was bothering him the most. "Laura, why didn't this happen before? The galaxy has been stable for thousands of years. What changed?" "I don't know, but I have a theory, and you're not going to like it." "Tell me." Laura highlighted Earth's position on the galactic map. "Look where we are, far out on the rim, isolated from the main communication networks, with a completely different technological and social development path. What if humanity's exile wasn't just about us being too aggressive? What if the coalition was trying to protect us from something?" The idea was disturbing, but it made sense. The coalition had never exiled a species before. They had contained aggressive civilizations, reformed dangerous cultures, and even wiped out species that posed extreme threats. But exile was unprecedented. Why would they choose that option for humanity? Jake left the laboratory with more questions than answers, but he knew one thing for certain. Earth needed to prepare for something much worse than galactic isolation. Over the next few months, the transformation of Earth accelerated. Director of Planetary Development Marcus Chen coordinated projects that would have been impossible just a few years earlier. Entire ecosystems were created in massive underground chambers, each one designed to preserve Earth's biodiversity if the planet's surface became uninhabitable. Orbital shipyards began construction of vessels that combined Earth's industrial capacity with colonial military technology. The most interesting developments happened in the cultural centers that had grown up around the refugee camps. Professor Dan Walsh, a cultural anthropologist from the former colony on Kepler 186F, documented how human society was evolving in real time. Earth's cities now featured architecture inspired by 12 different alien civilizations, but built with uniquely human modifications. Food that combined ingredients from 20 worlds was being grown in vertical farms that stretched toward the sky. Art galleries displayed paintings and sculptures that blended human creativity with aesthetic concepts learned from alien cultures. But it wasn't just human culture that was changing. The refugee population included more than just humans. Hidden among the colonial evacuees were small populations of non-hostile aliens who had chosen to live with humans rather than return to their homeworlds. These beings were now experiencing something that had never happened in galactic history. They were becoming more human. Elena Vasquez continued her work with the coral singers in the underwater cities beneath the Atlantic. The alien organisms had not only learned to communicate with Earth's dolphins, but were now teaching them concepts that no Earth creature had ever understood. Mathematics, physics, and even basic philosophy were being shared between species through songs that resonated through the ocean depths. "They're not just talking to each other," Elena explained to a gathering of xenobiologists from around the world. "They're creating something new. The dolphins are developing abstract thinking capabilities, and the coral singers are learning about individuality and personal choice. Neither species will ever be the same." Similar changes were happening. Everywhere humans and aliens lived together, the few Etherian refugees who had arrived with the colonial fleets were discovering individual consciousness for the first time in their species' history. Young Draknari were questioning the rigid caste system that had defined their culture for millennia. Even the logical, emotionless Zephyrians were beginning to show signs of developing what humans called intuition. General Rick Thompson watched these developments with fascination and growing concern. His integrated defense forces now included humans who had learned alien fighting techniques, aliens who had adopted human tactical flexibility, and hybrid units that thought and acted in ways that no military theorist had ever imagined. "We're not just preparing to defend Earth," he told Admiral Blake during their weekly strategy meeting. "We're preparing to defend something that has never existed before. A world where different species don't just coexist, they evolve together." The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Grace Kelly had been humanity's representative to the Galactic Coalition before the exile. She had spent the past 2 years in seclusion, writing her memoirs and trying to understand what had gone wrong with humanity's place in galactic society. But one evening, as she sat in her apartment overlooking the lights of New Geneva, she received an encrypted message on a communication frequency that had been dead for over a year. The sender was someone she had thought was lost forever. Dr. HFY, an Etherian scientist who had been her closest alien friend during her years as ambassador. The message was short, but it explained everything that had been happening in the galaxy. "Grace, the Coalition lied to everyone, including themselves. They didn't exile humanity because you were dangerous to galactic peace. They exiled you because you were immune to something that was coming, something that feeds on the very cooperation and unity that holds our civilization together. The silence is here now, and it's destroying everything we built. But you, isolated, out there on your lonely world, you might be the only ones who can stop it." The emergency meeting was called for dawn, but Jake Harrison hadn't slept anyway. Grace Kelly's message from Dr. HFY had changed everything. He stood in the conference room of the Global Defense Headquarters, looking at faces he had come to trust over the past 2 years. Admiral Susan Blake, General Rick Thompson, Dr. Laura Kim, and a dozen other leaders who had helped build Earth's new civilization. Grace sat at the head of the table, looking older than her 60 years. The message from her alien friend had shaken her deeply. "I've been analyzing Dr. HFY's communication for 3 days, she said. "The encryption is authentic. This is definitely from him, and it was sent from somewhere in the Zephyrian home system." "What exactly is the silence?" asked Intelligence Officer Tony Parker. He was a former colonial security chief who now coordinated Earth's information networks. HFY's message mentions it, but doesn't explain what it actually does. Grace activated a holographic display showing the galaxy map that Dr. Kim had been monitoring. "According to HFY, the silence isn't a weapon or an invasion force. It's something that attacks the quantum communication networks that connect different species. Once it infiltrates those networks, civilizations lose their ability to cooperate on a large scale. Dr. Patricia Lewis, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, leaned forward. You're talking about more than just communication breakdown. Most galactic species depend on shared consciousness networks for everything from basic decision-making to technological advancement. If those networks fail, the civilizations collapse, Jake finished. Not through war or destruction, but because they can't function as organized societies anymore. Exactly, Grace said. Yet High's data suggests that affected species revert to primitive, isolated communities within a few months. Planets that supported billions of people become collections of small villages that can barely maintain basic technology. Admiral Blake studied the tactical implications. So this silence is essentially a weapon that targets cooperation itself. It breaks down the social bonds that hold advanced civilizations together. But why hasn't it affected us? Asked General Thompson. Earth has communication networks, shared technologies, global cooperation systems. If this thing is so effective, why are we still functioning normally? Dr. Lewis had been studying that question for days. I think it's because of how human society developed. Most galactic species evolved cooperation as their primary survival strategy. They built civilizations based on collective consciousness, shared decision-making, and technological interdependence. But humans developed differently. She brought up a display showing human historical data. We evolved as individual hunters and problem solvers. Even our most cooperative societies maintain strong individual identity. We build networks and alliances, but we don't depend on them for basic functioning. Every human can think and act independently if necessary. Jake was beginning to understand. So when the silence attacks cooperative networks, most alien species collapse because they don't know how to function as individuals. But humans just adapt, Dr. Lewis said. We've always been good at surviving when our social structures break down. It's one of the traits that made the coalition nervous about us. Tony Parker had been analyzing communication logs from the affected systems. There's something else. The few signals we're still receiving from the galaxy suggest that this silence doesn't just attack randomly, it's intelligent and it's learning. Each system it hits falls faster than the last one. Learning what? Grace asked. How to be more effective. The first systems that went dark took months to collapse completely. Recent attacks have shut down entire sectors in weeks. And there's a pattern to which systems it hits first. Tony brought up a detailed map showing the progression of the silence across the galaxy. It targets the most cooperative, most interconnected civilizations first. The Etherian Collective, with their shared consciousness networks, was one of the first to fall. The Zephyrian Empire, with their logical decision-making algorithms, lasted longer but still collapsed within 6 months. Jake studied the pattern with growing unease. It's not just attacking randomly. It's dismantling galactic civilization piece by piece, starting with the species that are most dependent on cooperation, and saving the most independent, most stubborn species for last. Admiral Blake added grimly. President Alex Turner had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. If this thing is as intelligent as you're suggesting, then it knows about Earth. It knows we're here, and it knows we're different from the other species it's encountered, which means it's probably planning something special for us, General Thompson said. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth's orbital defense stations. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh appeared on the main screen, her face tight with excitement and fear. Command, we have a situation. Long-range sensors are detecting a single ship approaching the Sol system. It's moving slowly, broadcasting coalition identification codes. Jake felt his heart skip. What kind of ship? Zephyrian heavy cruiser, sir. The configuration matches Admiral Kethval's flagship, but the power readings are all wrong. The ship appears to be running on emergency systems only. Grace stood up slowly. Kethval. He's the one who enforced our exile. If he's coming here now, it means the coalition is desperate, Jake finished. Sarah, what's the ship's condition? Heavily damaged, sir. We're reading multiple hull breaches, failed life support systems, and what looks like jury-rigged repairs. The crew complement appears to be less than 10% of normal. Admiral Blake took command of the tactical situation. All defense stations to alert status. Prepare to intercept, but don't fire unless fired upon. If this is really Kethaval, we need to know what he has to say. Over the next 6 hours, the damaged Zephyrian cruiser limped into Earth's outer system. Jake stood on the bridge of the orbital defense platform New Yorktown, watching as the alien ship approached. It had once been a symbol of coalition power, a sleek vessel designed to project authority across multiple star systems. Now it looked like a broken toy, held together by desperation and luck. Incoming transmission, reported Communications Officer Beth Martinez. It's Admiral Kethaval himself requesting permission to approach Earth. Put him through. The screen flickered and showed the face that Jake remembered from their confrontation 3 years ago. But Admiral Kethaval looked nothing like the confident, cold official who had enforced humanity's exile. The Zephyrian's usually perfect uniform was stained and torn. His logical, emotionless expression had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Commander Harrison," Kethaval said, his translator struggling with words that seemed difficult for him to speak, "I request sanctuary for my ship and crew." Jake felt a moment of bitter satisfaction, but it was quickly replaced by concern. If Kethaval was here asking for help, then the situation in the galaxy was worse than anyone had imagined. "Admiral, explain your situation." The silence has taken the Zephyrian homeworlds, all of them. 3 billion of my people are now scattered across dead systems, unable to coordinate, unable to maintain their technology, unable to think beyond basic survival. Kethaval's voice was hollow. The great logic networks that guided our civilization for 10,000 years are silent. My people have forgotten how to make decisions without them. And you? I am here because Dr. Yethai sent me coordinates to your system before his final transmission. He said that Earth might be the only place in the galaxy where the old ways of thinking still work, where individuals can still choose their own actions without depending on collective systems. Jake looked around at his crew, seeing the same mixture of emotions on every face. These were the same aliens who had thrown humanity out of galactic society. Now they were begging for the very thing they had tried to deny humans, a place to belong. "Admiral, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Are you here as an invasion force, or are you here as refugees?" Kethaval was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Commander, my ship carries 43 survivors from a fleet of 10,000 vessels. We have no weapons, no supplies, and no way to return home. We are not an invasion force. We are the last free Zephyrians in the galaxy, and we are asking for mercy from the species we wronged." Jake made the decision that would define everything that came after. "Permission granted, Admiral. Welcome to Earth." 6 months after Admiral Kethaval's arrival, Earth had become something that no one in galactic history had ever imagined. The planet that once held 800 million humans now sheltered over 3 million beings from dozens of different species. Refugee ships arrived almost weekly, carrying the survivors of civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. Jake Harrison walked through the streets of New Geneva, marveling at how much everything had changed. Etherian refugees sat in coffee shops next to human families, their translucent forms shimmering as they tried to understand the concept of individual choice. Draknari warriors worked alongside human construction crews, building homes that combined alien engineering with Earth materials. Even the proud Zephyrians had learned to ask for help instead of demanding logical solutions to every problem. But the most remarkable changes were happening in the children. Human kids played with young Etherians who were learning to think for themselves for the first time. Draknari cubs discovered that they could choose their own paths instead of following ancient caste traditions. Zephyrian youngsters began asking questions that had no logical answers, just because they were curious. Dr. Paul Jenkins had been studying these interactions for months, and his findings amazed everyone. "It's not just cultural exchange," he explained to the World Council during their weekly meeting. We're seeing evolutionary changes happening in real time. Species that have been locked into specific behavioral patterns for millennia are developing new ways of thinking just by living around humans. President Turner leaned forward. What kind of changes? Independence, creativity, the ability to make decisions without consulting group consciousness or logical algorithms. The refugee children are becoming more human in their thinking patterns while still retaining their unique alien perspectives. Maria Santos, who coordinated refugee services, had seen this firsthand. The young Etherians are creating individual art for the first time in their species' history. Draknari children are questioning why warriors can't also be artists or scientists. The Zephyrian kids are learning to laugh and play games that have no logical purpose. But the most important discovery came from Dr. Paul Jenkins' research into Earth's biosphere. Working with refugee scientists from a dozen different worlds, he had found something extraordinary. Earth itself is protecting us, he announced during an emergency science council meeting. The planet's magnetic field, combined with the quantum resonance of its diverse life forms, creates a natural barrier against the silence. Admiral Blake studied the data with interest. You're saying Earth is naturally immune to this thing? Not just immune. Earth actively disrupts the silence's ability to infiltrate consciousness networks. The chaotic, diverse nature of life on this planet creates a kind of mental static that interferes with the silence's attacks. And the more diverse life becomes, the stronger the protection gets, added Dr. Patricia Lewis. Every refugee species that settles here, every new way of thinking that develops makes Earth harder for the silence to touch, but everyone knew that protection wouldn't last forever. Long-range sensors showed that the silence had consumed most of the galaxy. Whole sectors that had once blazed with the light of countless civilizations were now dark and silent. The few remaining free worlds were isolated islands in an ocean of emptiness. General Rick Thompson had spent months preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Earth's defense forces now included beings from 20 different species, all working together, in ways that would have been impossible under the old coalition system. Human tactics combined with Draknari warrior traditions and Zephyrian strategic planning created military units that thought and fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. We're not preparing for a siege, Thompson explained to the Joint Command staff. We're preparing for a liberation campaign. Earth has become something the silence has never encountered before, a world that gets stronger through diversity instead of weaker. The plan was ambitious beyond anything humans had ever attempted. Instead of waiting for the silence to reach Earth, they would take the fight to it. Ships built with hybrid technologies that combined the best engineering from dozens of worlds would carry crews that represented a new kind of civilization. Not human, not alien, but something entirely new. Jake found himself in command of the operation, promoted to Admiral of the Great Fleet. As he stood on the bridge of the flagship, Unity, he looked out at the most diverse armada ever assembled. Human vessels flew alongside rebuilt Zephyrian cruisers, Etherian bioships, and completely new designs that incorporated ideas from multiple species. The crews were even more remarkable than the ships. Human captains worked with Zephyrian tactical officers who had learned intuition and creativity. Etherian navigators guided ships using both collective knowledge and individual insight. Draknari Marines fought alongside human soldiers who had adopted alien honor codes while keeping their human adaptability. But the real weapon against the silence wasn't technology or tactics. It was the new way of thinking that had developed on Earth. Every being in the fleet maintained their individual identity while also working as part of a greater whole. They were connected but not dependent, cooperative but not controlled. The first test came when the fleet encountered a silence probe at the edge of the Sol system. The alien construct was a thing of dark beauty, a crystalline structure that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. It immediately tried to infiltrate the fleet's communication networks, seeking the collective consciousness pathways that it used to destroy other civilizations. But the fleet's networks were different. Instead of centralized control systems, they used what Dr. Jenkins called chaotic cooperation. Each ship could function independently, but they chose to work together. When the silence tried to attack their communication systems, it found nothing to grab onto. The fleet's diversity and independence made it immune to the very thing that had destroyed the rest of the galaxy. The probe was destroyed within minutes, but not before transmitting data back to the main silence presence near the galactic core. For the first time in its existence, the silence had encountered prey that could fight back. The Great Fleet's journey to the galactic core took 3 months, and they found wonders and horrors along the way. Dead worlds where billion-year-old civilizations had collapsed into primitive tribes. Space stations floating empty in the void, their inhabitants vanished or reduced to mindless shells. But they also found pockets of resistance, small groups, of survivors who had somehow maintained their independence. On each world they liberated, the fleet left behind teams of Earth's new hybrid civilization. Humans and aliens working together, teaching the survivors how to think independently while still cooperating. How to build networks that enhanced individual choice instead of replacing it. How to be connected without being controlled. The final battle took place in the ruins of the Coalition's ancient capital, a star system that had once governed thousands of worlds. The silence had made this place its stronghold, a nexus of dark energy that reached across the galaxy. But as the Great Fleet approached, something unexpected happened. The silence, which had consumed countless civilizations without resistance, hesitated. For the first time, it was facing beings who could not be absorbed, controlled, or broken. The diversity and independence that the Coalition had feared in humanity had spread to other species, creating something genuinely new. The battle was unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of trying to destroy the silence with weapons, the fleet surrounded it with life, diversity, and chaotic creativity. Ships from dozens of species broadcast music, art, individual thoughts, and personal dreams. They filled space with the noise of free minds choosing their own paths. The silence, which fed on order and control, began to weaken. It had evolved to consume civilizations that thought as one. It had no way to process or attack the beautiful chaos of true diversity. In the end, the silence didn't die. It transformed. Exposed to the creative chaos of Earth's new civilization, it began to develop something it had never possessed: individual consciousness. The ancient hunger that had driven it to consume entire galaxies became curiosity about the infinite possibilities of independent thought. Jake stood on the bridge of the Unity as the galaxy began to reawaken. On thousands of worlds, the survivors, who had been trapped in primitive isolation, started to remember how to dream of the stars again. But this time, they would build something different. Not a galaxy ruled by collective consciousness or logical control, but a community of independent minds choosing to work together. Earth, the small blue world that had been cast out by the galaxy, had become the seed of something greater. A civilization where being different wasn't a threat to be eliminated, but a gift to be celebrated. As the Great Fleet began its journey home, Jake received a message from President Turner. "Admiral, how does it feel to save the galaxy?" Jake looked out at the ships around him, crewed by beings from dozens of worlds who had learned to be individuals while choosing to be family. "Mr. President, I don't think we saved the galaxy. I think we taught it how to save itself." The stars no longer looked cold and distant. They looked like home.